There's a version of you that you've been protecting, not consciously, but carefully. It's the version that opens the textbook and feels like that counts. The version that sits at a desk for 2 hours and calls it studying. The version that says, "I've been working so hard," and means it, genuinely believes it, but hasn't stopped to ask what all that work is actually producing. That's the version we need to talk about. Because right now, today, in the most mundane moments of your life, the morning, you chose to scroll for 40 minutes. The afternoon, you reviewed the same chapter without actually thinking. The evening, you went through the motions of productivity. You are making financial decisions. You just don't feel them yet. That's the problem with early-stage decisions. They're invisible. The cost doesn't arrive at the moment of the choice. It arrives a decade later, wearing a different face, and by then most people have forgotten the original transaction. So let's be precise about what's actually happening. Every day you spend in student life is not primarily an academic exercise. It is a period of capital formation. Not financial capital, not yet, but cognitive capital, which is the only kind that reliably converts into the financial kind over time. The lectures, the assignments, the late-night problem sets. These are not obligations you owe to an institution. They are raw inputs into a compounding system. And like any compounding system, the early inputs carry disproportionate weight. What you build or fail to build now does not stay local to this period of your life. It extends forward silently for 20 or 30 years. Most people understand compound interest when it applies to money. Put $100 away at 20 and it becomes something significant at 60. They nod at that. But they don't apply the same logic to skill, to depth of knowledge, to the quality of their thinking. They treat those as flat, as if learning something well today is equivalent to learning it poorly, as if the person who genuinely understood the mechanism versus the person who memorized the surface will end up in the same place. They won't. The divergence starts small and becomes enormous, not because of some dramatic difference in talent, but because of the compounding effect of real comprehension over time. Here's what that looks like practically. The student who understood the underlying logic, not just what the answer was, but why the answer was, has a mental model that transfers. When they encounter a new problem in a new context 5 years from now, they have a framework to reach for. The student who chased grades has a transcript. The transcript opens a door. The mental model keeps you alive inside the room. This is the distinction between skill stacking and grade chasing. And it matters more than most people are willing to admit. Because grade chasing feels productive. It produces visible outputs. It generates positive feedback in the short term. Teachers are pleased. Parents are satisfied. The GPA looks clean. And all of that is not without value. Credentials are real. Signals matter in labor markets. But credentials are the floor, not the ceiling. They get you considered. They do not determine what you can actually do once you're there. And what you can actually do is a function of whether your discipline was aimed at genuine understanding or at the performance of understanding. This is where the psychology becomes important. Most people's discipline is outcome-based. They study because of an exam. They work hard because of a deadline. They behave differently when the external pressure is present. And they revert when it disappears. You've seen this. You've probably lived this. The 2 weeks before finals that feel like a completely different life, followed by the relief that drops everything. What that pattern tells you is that the motivation is external. The energy source is outside the self. And external energy sources are inherently unstable because the environment is not in your control. Outcome-based motivation has a structural flaw. It requires continuous external pressure to sustain the behavior. When the pressure lifts, the behavior collapses. This is why routines fall apart under stress. Not because stress makes people lazy, but because stress reveals the actual architecture of motivation. When everything gets difficult simultaneously, outcome-based people conserve energy by dropping the things that don't have immediate consequences. The daily reading, the consistent practice, the habit of thinking carefully about something even when nobody's checking. Those are the first casualties. And because they're the things that compound, losing them is disproportionately costly. Identity-based discipline works differently. It is not, I study because of the exam. It is, I am someone who thinks rigorously about hard things. The behavior is not the product of a target. It is an expression of self-concept. When stress arrives and external pressure mounts, identity-based behavior is more durable. because abandoning it creates psychological dissonance, not just inconvenience. You are no longer just missing a task. You are acting inconsistently with who you understand yourself to be. This matters enormously for long-term wealth building because the financial outcomes we're discussing, the compounding of skill into leverage, into income, into independence, are not products of peak performances. They are products of consistency. The person who does the work every day at a decent level over a long period of time almost always outperforms. The person who works in intense bursts with long gaps between them. The market rewards reliability. Employers reward reliability. Compounding rewards reliability. And identity-based discipline is simply more reliable than the alternative. But there's something else eroding this capacity in ways that most people haven't fully reckoned with, and it's worth being direct about it. Your phone is not just a distraction. It is a cognitive restructuring device. When you use it the way most people use it, checking notifications reflexively, cycling through content that delivers small rewards at high frequency, you are training your brain's reward system to expect stimulation at a certain tempo. You are calibrating your dopamine response to shallow, fast, variable inputs. And that calibration has consequences for how you experience everything else. Deep work, the kind that actually builds cognitive capital, is slow. It's uncomfortable. It requires sustained attention on something that doesn't reward you for minutes at a time. When your brain has been conditioned to expect stimulation every 30 seconds, sitting with a difficult problem for 20 minutes feels, neurologically, like deprivation. Not discomfort, deprivation. Your brain interprets the absence of stimulation as a problem to be solved, and the solution it suggests is always the same: reach for the phone. This is not a willpower failure. It is a calibration problem, and it compounds in the wrong direction. The more often you interrupt deep work to seek stimulation, the more you reinforce the pattern. The less tolerance you build for the kind of sustained, effortful thinking that produces real understanding. And the less you compound cognitively. This is why phone addiction is not a productivity issue. It is an economic issue. Not in the metaphorical sense, but in the literal sense that it degrades the primary asset you are supposed to be building during this period of your life. The people who will perform unusually well economically over the next decade will not necessarily be the most credentialed or the most naturally gifted. They will largely be the people who manage to protect their capacity for deep, focused thought during an era when almost every social and technological pressure was working against it. That capacity is becoming rare. Rare things have value. If you can sit with a difficult problem for an hour without reaching for your phone, you are already developing something that most of your peers are quietly surrendering. This connects to a broader principle that rarely gets named clearly: anti-stimulation as competitive advantage. We are in an environment of extreme dopamine abundance. Entertainment is limitless, cheap, and always accessible. Food is engineered for palatability. Social media is designed by some of the most sophisticated behavioral scientists alive to keep your attention engaged at the highest possible level. Against this backdrop, the ability to tolerate boredom, to sit in the low-stimulation state that is required for genuine reflection, for hard thinking, for reading something long and complex, without fragmenting your attention, is not asceticism. It is strategy. It is choosing to preserve the cognitive architecture that converts effort into insight, and insight into leverage. This is also why busyness is not a signal of wealth-building behavior. Busyness is noise. You can fill every hour of every day with activity that produces nothing of lasting value. And many people do. The student who attends every lecture but never reads beyond what's assigned. The person who replies to every email immediately but never finishes the project that actually matters. The individual who is visibly, demonstrably, exhaustingly busy and who, 10 years from now, looks back and cannot identify anything that compounded. Effort without direction is not discipline. It is motion. And motion, in the absence of leverage, does not generate wealth. Leverage is the concept that changes everything. And it's the one that gets the least attention in conversations about student discipline. Hard work without leverage produces linear outcomes at best. You put in effort, you get a proportional return, you repeat. This is a sustainable life, but not an exceptional one. Leverage is what changes the ratio between input and output. Skills that transfer across domains are leverage. Understanding systems rather than memorizing outputs is leverage. Building a reputation for reliability and depth of thought is leverage, because it changes the opportunities people offer you without requiring a corresponding increase in your effort. All of these forms of leverage are built or not built in the daily decisions you're making right now, and this is where punctuality becomes more interesting than it appears. Showing up on time, to class, to commitments, to deadlines, it is not a minor social courtesy. It is an early signal about the relationship between your intentions and your behavior. People who are consistently late are communicating without saying it, that their internal time estimate is not calibrated to reality, or that other priorities consistently displace their commitments, or that they don't yet understand what their time and other people's time actually cost. Employers read this. Collaborators read this. It is an economic signal that either opens or closes doors, quietly, long before any formal evaluation happens. Small things compound. Now step back and look at the full picture. You are in a period of your life where the primary asset you are building is not money. It is capability. The discipline you practice today is either growing that asset or degrading it. The habits of attention you form now are either building your capacity for deep, leveraged work or calibrating your brain for shallow, reactive, easily substituted labor. The relationship you develop with difficulty, whether you sit with it or flee from it, is either building the psychological resilience that sustains long-term performance or establishing the avoidance patterns that will limit you when stakes are highest. But 10 years from now, the difference is not subtle. It shows up in who is doing work that requires genuine judgment versus work that can be done by anyone. It shows up in who has options versus who has obligations. It shows up in income, yes, but more fundamentally in autonomy, in the degree to which your life is shaped by your own decisions rather than by the constraints of what you are able and willing to do. Your future income is not being decided in a boardroom or a job interview years from now. It is being decided in the next hour, in whether you read the chapter or scroll past it, in whether you sit with the difficult concept until you actually understand it or accept the comfortable approximation, in whether the version of you that sits down to work tomorrow is the same version or a slightly sharper one. The accumulation of those moments is the only mechanism through which the future gets built. The question is not whether you are working hard. The question is whether what you are doing today, in the ordinary quiet of a Tuesday afternoon, is something that compounds. Because everything else is just expensive motion.